So two things. I have a little cold thing. I'm not contagious, but I apologize for my voice, and I may choke every now and then. The second thing is, segueing from Frank's very compelling talk about creativity and the other guy, I forget his name, that whole question about like how to become more creative. How many of you think you are creative? Raise your hand. Okay, rest of you, cut the crap. No. I'm actually completely serious. It's not about like, I'm going to expose myself to more stuff to become more creative. The first order of business is you deciding or you realizing that you actually are creative. If you deny that you're creative, all the things that Frank suggested you do won't work. So just sit with that for a second. Okay, so Jeff asked me to talk today about my translation, how do you bridge from creativity to innovation, and then from my addition to that to successful innovation, because one of the things that I have realized in my work at Harvard is that all innovation is not necessarily successful innovation. So I am going to talk to that. But before I talk to that, I want to spend a little bit of time underscoring why innovation, which may sound obvious, self-evident, but for a lot of people it isn't. And so I just want to, if you would just bear with me for about 15 minutes, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about why, and then we're going to talk a little bit about what, and then we're going to get into what Jeff asked me to talk about, which is how. So the why piece is, I think, best, well, let me tell you a story. Last Sunday night, my wife, Kate, and I went out to dinner with 3 friends in the North End, which, if you're not from Boston, is our Italian section, I guess. Sunday night, and about 15, and we were sort of sitting at a table like this, and I'm pretending you're Kate, and about 15 minutes into the dinner, Kate looks at me and does this. And I'm being relatively intelligent, not genius level, but relatively intelligent. I translate that into shut the hell up. Whereupon I became a young child and completely shut the hell up. Didn't say another word for another hour. Eventually dinner's over. We walk home. We lived downtown. And I'm like, what was that all about? And she says, just sometimes you're too energetic. And sometimes you have too much to say. And sometimes you have so many questions. Whereupon I like blew up. We were standing on the Greenway. You know the Greenway of downtown Boston? We were literally standing on the sidewalk screaming at each other. And ultimately, don't worry, we love each other madly. We're fine. Everything's fine. We have one of those relationships, you know. And anyway, the end of it is, by the way, nice shoes. The end of it is, I finally say to her, listen, I'm totally okay with the energy comment. I'm totally okay with the I have too much to say comment, and sometimes I agree with that. I have too much to say. But you know what I'm not okay with? I am not okay with the incessant question comment. The criticism of me as having too many questions. Too many questions. Oh. No function, all right, hold on. There we go. Because I believe, and I think those educators or just generally intelligent people in the room and online, wherever you are, you already understand that the question is the root of all learning. You know that, right? The question is the root of all achievement. And the question is the root of all innovation. And in today's world, I believe we need questioning and innovation more than we have ever needed it before. And my sort of terrible view, is this, that the status quo of the world today blows. That the status quo is unacceptable, that standing still is unacceptable, that we will die if we stand still. We will die if we do not innovate. And when I talk about the we, I'm talking about every layer of the equation. and I'm going to take you through very quickly every layer of the equation. In order to do that, I need to give each of you an imaginary set of binoculars. So look under your chair. So I actually did this talk at Harvard a couple weeks ago, and I said, look under your chair, and like half the audience looked under their chair. This is Harvard.
I don't feel so bad.
Yeah, there you go. So pick up your binoculars, and let's look at this thing. What do you see? Come on, help me out here. Earth. There's a little cheat sheet in the corner. For those non-geniuses, there you go. What I see is a planet that is not evolving, it's devolving, due primarily to mankind. And if we don't innovate it, we are out of business, right? And as an example, there's this. How many of you have heard of the Pacific garbage vortex? Very good. So you're aware that there's this thing in the Pacific Ocean, duh, that is the size of the state of Texas, that consists of 1.3 trillion pieces of trash. Crazy. Like, just sit with that, right? The state of Texas. Turns out there's one very similar in the Atlantic Ocean, and there's another very similar in, I believe, the Indian Ocean, or somebody correct me if I'm wrong there. There's a third one somewhere out there. We're killing the planet. And absent innovation, we will kill ourselves. The good news is there's this kid, and I say kid because he's 24 years old, and he started when he was 17. You looks like you've read the story. I think his name's Derek, and I think he's from Denmark, who's been working on solving the problem for 7 years, of his own volition, his own whatever. And he actually has invented this thing behind me, which is a 2,000-foot-long boom that they're actually towing out to the Pacific trash vortex as we speak to solve the problem. Do you have something to say? No. So the good news is innovation might just save the planet. The next layer down, if you take a look at your binoculars, you got your binoculars? Somebody has binoculars. Look at it again. If you drill down a little further, you see nation states, you see countries, and in some cases you see empires. And the interesting thing about empires is that they do this. They collapse. They rise and they fall. Every time. There's not one empire that was ever established in the history of mankind that didn't collapse, didn't fall. And the reason why is because they stopped innovating. The reason why is because hubris took over. The reason why is because they thought their poopy didn't stink. They thought they had figured it all out. And the minute any of us, at a country, at an individual, at a community, the minute any of us think we've got it all figured out is the beginning of the end of us. So let's look again. What do you see? City. So here's another story. Kate and I, 3 weekends ago, were in Lowell, Massachusetts. Anybody been to Lowell? How many Lowells? So we went up for something called the Kinetic Sculpture Road Race, which is this like crazy thing that I won't explain, but it's really fun. They do it every year. And we're walking around the city on a Sunday, and I start reading about it a little bit. And so it turned out in 1835, Lowell was the #1 industrial technology city in the world. Like ahead on so many fronts, primarily in the textile space, but other spaces too, manufacturing, all sorts of stuff. And 30 years later, Lowell was effectively out of business. They went from #1 to #0 in 30 short years. The reason why? They stopped innovating. Just like the nation states, they stopped innovating. Go one layer down. What do you see? A company. And the crazy thing about this, when I started thinking about what examples I wanted to use, there are many. There are many, including even churches or religions, I don't know. And the one I picked is a company called RIM and a product called BlackBerry. So for the young people in the room now, 2009, this company owned 24% global share of the smartphone market. 2009. 2014, they owned 2.5%. 2018, they own 0.1%. Oh my God. The reason? All the reasons already stated. They stopped innovating. One layer down, what's this one? Sarah. So this is Sarah. Sarah is a software engineer. She works in Chelmsford, Massachusetts for a robotics company. She has a lovely apartment in Littleton, Massachusetts. She's very happy. She has a little dog named Pookie. By the way, none of that's true. I just made that up. But it could be true. And the wonderful thing, she has a great job. The not so wonderful thing is the rate of technological change is such that if Sarah doesn't increase her technical abilities significantly every year, 25% of her capacity to create value diminishes every year. So in 4 years, she will be unemployable. If she does not innovate herself through continuing education, through keeping up with the latest technologies, she will go from having a great job to having no job in 4 years. And then the last layer of this thing, and I apologize as this is like a little too creepy personal, that's you. So here's the picture. You're at the end of your life, and you're looking at it through the lens of a movie, and the movie is called My Life. And the question is, when you get to the end of the movie, do you walk out, or do you give yourself a standing ovation, and then do you walk out of the theater going, that was amazing. I loved every minute of it. The protagonist was incredible. The risk he or she took was crazy. The value they created for mankind was profound. I'm crying with joy. Or do you walk out of that theater going, what the fuck? My point here, your life is a choice in terms of being a creator, being an innovator, creating value for you, creating value for others. And this is going back to my question of like, who's creative in the room? You're all creative. In part because it's innate to you. I disagree with the gene guy. And secondly, because it has to be. In order to realize the full potential of your life and help the world save itself from itself, each of us have to step forward as innovators. If you want your movie to be good and you want the movie of the human species to be good, we must innovate, period. You buy that? Anybody buy that? Sure. Yeah. Okay, so now I should have started with this. Well, what exactly is innovation? And I don't have your stuff, Frank. I just have my stuff. So here's my very grossly simplified view. Well, the first question is, what's creativity? And this, I borrowed this from somebody, and I tried to source it last night because I stole it. But that's its own form of creativity. And I couldn't find it, so this is not mine. This is somebody else who's smarter than me, whatever. But I love this, right? Creativity is intelligence allowed to play. I love that. What's innovation? This is mine. This is my grossly simplified definition of what the hell this overused term innovation is. And it's really, really simple. The after serves us better than the before. Period. And if we look around us as humans, as we look around us as educators, we look around us as administrators, we look around us as whatever we are in society, what do we see? Nothing but opportunities to make things better. And that gets back to our responsibility and our opportunity to be innovators. The bridge provided by Theodore Levitt, who was an HBS professor for many years, is this. What is often lacking is not creativity in the idea-creating sense, but innovation in the action-producing sense, i.e. putting ideas to work. My qualifier to Ted, if I can call him Ted, I don't think he's with us anymore, putting ideas to work that are effective. I think there's this like naive view that all innovation is good innovation, and that is fundamentally not true. In fact, I hosted a talk the other night at Harvard called Technology, Innovation, and Public Purpose. Ash Carter, the prior Secretary of Defense, was on stage with me for probably an hour or so when we talked about the fundamental truth that a lot of technological innovation carries with it unintended consequences. So the short-term consequence may be positive, but the societal consequence may be negative. And that is also, I think, a responsibility we all share as members of the human race. Okay, so we got the why, we got the what, now the how. I have no idea. Good luck. Any questions? There's actually two lenses I want to look at this through with you. Back to the binos, I suppose. Left side will look outside in, right side will look inside out. So we've got to start here. The reason why I don't really know the how is because nobody really does. 95% of most innovation fails. 95% of startups fail. 95% of corporate innovation fails. 95% of new products fail. I mean, if we knew how, that would not be true, right? We just like do it that way and everything would be successful. So we don't know how. Nobody knows how. If they try to convince you they know how, they're full of shit. But we have many mechanisms. In fact, if you Google how to be innovative online, Google it, you will literally get, I think, hi. Hello. Come join us. You'll get like 7 million hits. You'll get 5 million frameworks. You'll get 3 gazillion YouTube videos from people like me trying to convince you that they know how. And they're all full of shit. Nobody knows how. This is like a design thinking thing. It looks pretty good, right? Discover, define, develop, deliver. I love alliteration. That must be how. Alliterate. In order to innovate, alliterate. Any questions? So, in all the work that we do at Harvard, I actually just left a strategic planning report out with my staff. And we have a strategic plan every fiscal year, and we're talking about our methodology in terms of working with innovators. And it boils down to one really important capability / philosophy / attribute, whatever, truth. And I'll explain what I mean. The three biggest boo-boos in innovating anything, and boo-boos is a technical term. For those that aren't aware of it, it means mistake. The 3 biggest boo-boos, here we go. Or maybe here we go. Maybe we don't go. Let's try again. Boo-boo number 1 carries 80% of the boo-booishness. Swear to God. And we'll talk more about this in a second. The problem identified is actually not really the problem. Boo-boo number 2. This is a mind bender. The customer is actually a human, not a function. It's not a demographic. It's not a role. It's not a title. It's actually a human. And humans are icky, so we don't like to go there. And then boo-boo number 3, and we'll talk more about this one too. The innovation, woo-woo, that we invent. Look what we did. We made this thing. You're like, but that thing doesn't actually connect to the thing you said that you were trying to solve. Like, how'd that happen? So let's dive into these. Oops, sorry. The word, the attribute, the sensibility is this idea of truth. Truth of the problem. Truth. Truth. Truth of the problem, truth of the customer, truth of the solution. We as humans are remarkably capable of deluding ourselves about everything. Deluding ourselves about everything. I'm now going to pick on my sister. She's 65 years old and revealed to me 2 months ago, she went to Bryn Mawr College, highly educated, highly intelligent, much smarter than me. She revealed to me, sitting on her sofa 2 months ago, I don't have any money. I'm like, what? I don't have any savings. Like, well, you have a retirement plan? I know. I never put any money away for retirement. Delusion. It is our specialty. We delude ourselves on so many fronts. Innovators are really good at deluding themselves into thinking they know what the problem is, they know what the customer is, and they know what the solution is, when they don't. I want to give you a quick example of somebody that got to the truth of the problem. So a friend of mine, a guy named Mark Edwards, 4 years ago started a company called Upstream, a nonprofit, upstream with a friend of his, Peter, and their focus was trying to break the cycle of poverty. And instead of jumping to the symptoms of the cycle of poverty, Mark and Peter spent the first year, an entire year, not working on the solution, working on a diagnostic of the problem. And what they determined, they just kept going upstream. Like, there's a problem. Why is this a problem? Why is this happening? It's a problem because of this. Why is that happening? Why is that happening? Why is that happening? And what they determined is one of the major threads that causes or the perpetuation of the cycle of poverty are unplanned pregnancies. There are many primarily single women in the United States that end up having children that don't want children and are not prepared to have children and are certainly not economically equipped to have children. Okay? The reason why that is because 95% of the clinics in the United States prescribe the wrong form of contraception. They prescribe either condoms or the pill, both of which are not as effective as they should be. The IUD and the patch are far more effective. So Mark and Peter have built an organization that is working with clinics in various states around the country simply to help the clinics both prescribe the right contraception and provide the right contraception. The punchline of the story is, I think, because of the analysis of the root, getting to the root cause, going all the way upstream to the real problem. The symptom is the cycle of poverty. That's not the problem. Mark and Peter, in the last 12 months, have raised $250 million. Sit with that for a second. $250 million. Simply because they got to the truth of the problem. Okay, truth of the human. This is where we get icky. So anybody who's not comfortable with humans should probably leave for like 10 minutes and then come back. This is basic calculus. The adoption of any innovation requires the benefit to exceed the cost, right? We are ROI calculators, man. Every move we make, every move. You guys deciding to be here tonight, staff accepted. You really had no choice. Well, you did have a choice, but it could have been ugly. You all made an ROI calculation. Is it worth my time, right? Is it worth my time? Is it worth the money? But it's really not my money. It's the school's money, so who cares? But you did a calculation. This is what we do. What's interesting is we calculate in a number of different modalities, if you will. And there are these different relationships that exist. There's money to get money. So I spend money to make more money. That's called investing. I spend time at work to create time outside of work. That's called vacation. And then this third thing is around behaviors. So the example I use here is I decide to forego my need for ice cream. I really need ice cream. I really love ice cream. Because I seek to feel better about myself by looking better. And this is all about Maslow. How many know Maslow? Like, I'm a fan. I believe this is fundamentally true, that the vast majority of our actions are fueled by the hierarchy of need, and the vast majority of our needs are fundamentally primal. They're around safety and control and physiological stuff. So as an innovator, what I say to people is you need to understand this hierarchy, and you need to recognize that the vast majority of your customers are operating at that behavioral level. I'll give you an example. What problem does Uber solve? Anybody? Come on.
Point A to point B.
Point A to point B. Just like a cab. Yep. What else?
Not having to have a car.
Hmm?
Not having to buy a car.
Not having to buy a car. Just like a cab. Yep. What else?
You don't have to hail a cab down.
Don't have to hail a cab. Okay.
No cash needed.
What's that?
No cash.
No cash. Anybody else?
Security. Yeah,
Security. Tell me more about that, Jeff. What does that mean?
That means if my wife is going to take a Uber, I know there's an electronic trail. She's seen the driver. She's seen the license plate.
So let's go back to the hierarchy. Security is this first cousin of safety. I also believe that Uber gives us comfort. Uber puts us in control. How many are old enough to remember cabs? They're yellow. So this is my cab experience. Back when I was in my 20s and 30s, I started a business. It was moderately successful. We were like go-go kids, you know. And we had big meetings all the time. And we got to go to New York. And so I'd get up and I'd call the cab. 6 a.m. I got a 7 o'clock, you know, Eastern. Remember Eastern shuttle? Went out of business. Call the cab company. Yeah, what do you want? Can I get a cab to go to the Logan Airport? Yeah. And then you're standing on the curb waiting, and you're starting to sweat, you know, and you're like, wait, I should save the sweating for the client meeting. This is absurd. And no cab. And now it's like the flight's leaving in 40 minutes, and do you remember this?
So true.
There's no cab. And so you call the cab dispatch back, and you go, hey, and for some reason you're afraid to call them. Hi, I called 15 minutes ago for a cab. What do you want here? Okay. And back then you were connected to a landline. And then maybe the cab showed, maybe it didn't, and the cab company didn't care, and you know, there was no rating of anybody, and you know, it was, but the point is you felt completely out of control. So the profundity of Uber is it works on all three levels. It saves money, it saves time, and I think most importantly, it makes you feel better. It meets a fundamental physiological and safety need. And if you want to be a brilliant innovator, understand the levels of need. It's not all about money for money or time for time. All three of these things are going on. Like when you guys were calculating whether to come to this thing, it wasn't just about the money. It wasn't just about the time. You were imagining what it was going to feel like. You were imagining the hassle of travel. You were imagining how many of your needs were going to be exposed, how many of your needs were going to be fulfilled. It is a complex value proposition or calculation that you're making to determine whether this is an investment you want to make. Does that make sense? Now I taught a workshop last night at Harvard called Think Like an Innovator. And there's like 150 Harvard students in the room, and they're like, this is so complicated. It is complicated, which is why 95% of these suckers fail. If it was easy, the win rate would be like 100%. We just like plug in the variables and hit the go, and that would pop the innovation. It's hard and it's messy. I don't know why this is happening. The last thing I want to say about behavior, and this, I'm sorry, Frank, and to your professor buddies, I have no data to support this. Actually, I have no data to support anything, which is why I didn't do so well in business school. I believe that 90% of the adoption of new innovations, new sort of behavior change is a function of one of two motivators, either desperation or aspiration, the poles. The stuff in the middle doesn't play at all. And I also believe that what really works of those two things, aspiration versus desperation, is desperation. That mankind is so reluctant to change anything. We are pattern creatures. That our willingness to adopt new stuff, even if the ROI is not bad, is almost zero. But if we are desperate, bango, bingo, we're ready, let's do it. And the example I use is, I've been talking about losing 10 pounds for 2 years. Sit with that. I've been talking about losing 10 pounds. It's an aspiration. You know, I'd really like to lose 10 pounds. I'd like to be a little svelter. Have I? No, because it's an aspiration. Went to the doctor yesterday. Doctor says to me, Chris, I got some bad news. If you don't lose 10 pounds, you're going to have a cardiac arrest. Do you think I'm going to lose 10 pounds? I'll lose 10 pounds by Sunday. So as innovators, if you can tap into desperation-based needs. Here's another example. You guys know meal delivery? So Blue Apron is the maybe the leader, and they've been doing really well in terms of customer acquisition, and they've been doing really poorly in terms of customer attrition. And you say, well, it's the quality of the product. It's not the quality of the product. The need is aspirational. You know, I'd love to have dinner with Johnny every, you know, like 3 family dinners a week, and they're going to deliver all the stuff, and it's going to be great. And the problem is, Wednesday that you thought you were going to have dinner with Johnny, you actually have to stay at work for whatever, and all of a sudden you have this stuff that you ordered for a meal on Wednesday that you're actually not doing, and all of a sudden that turns into guilt. And then all of a sudden you have all this packaging. You have like all these packages, like everything comes in a little container, and you have all this like cardboard and plastic and shit. And you're like, oh, I feel badly about myself. I'm like wasting things, and I'm like destroying the earth, and I got to stop doing this. And so the aspirational need drives acquisition, and the desperation need or behavior drives attrition. Does that make sense? Okay. Back to the hierarchy. The bottom is desperation, and the top is aspiration. 90% of the action is at the bottom, or certainly to the middle. The last point here is innovation is not about creating the function. You know, the example you use, I don't have a phone, but anybody has a phone, probably on your phone you have at least 4 screens of apps, and you never go to the 4th screen. Those are apps in search of a reason to exist. You know, it's like I say to people, downloads of your app are not success. Utilization of your app is success. But fundamentally, getting adoption of the innovation is really about changing behavior. There's another expression that I came up with the other day, which is kind of cute, which is in order for people to go through the door of change, they must first walk through the field of the familiar. That our ability to embrace straight up innovation, wholly new category, capability, whatever, is almost zero. That if you want to successfully market your innovation, make an element of it familiar. We know what a meal is. We know what a cab is. We know the things, you know, we know these things contextually, and that helps us embrace the new things within them. Okay, let's keep rolling here. Try. The last thing I'll say, which is what dissuades most innovators from being innovative, and the reason, by the way, the reason why the folks in the room that aren't declared they aren't creative is because they're actually afraid of it. The reason why most people don't step forward as innovators isn't because they're not capable, it's because they don't want to expose the truth that maybe they're not that good at it. So we'd rather just deny or delude, and that's why more progress doesn't happen. And I wrote a piece a couple weeks ago, it was literally just about the difference between hard and easy. And it was triggered by a Seth Godin article about education, and I don't know if you read that, but it was about the whole idea that education is too easy. It's structured to be too convenient. Just plug and play, consume the content, spit it back in a test, you're done. And it should be much messier and much harder, both for practitioners and the students. The piece that I wrote, the hypothesis is this: anything of value is hard. Anything of real meaning, real material value is hard. And the reason why it's hard, the reason why hard is because hard takes sacrifice. Like if I have to study before I actually vote, really? Like I have to study each of the candidates' policies and positions on everything from healthcare to immigration? That seems like a lot of work, Sarah, don't you think? Why don't I just go to the poll and hit the button? So nobody wants to sacrifice. That sounds like a pain in the ass. And the other thing it takes is taking fear on. Like exposing yourself to, I don't know this stuff. And maybe even admitting to those around you, I don't actually know. I don't know what I'm doing. And nobody wants to expose themselves to that. So we avoid fear, we avoid sacrifice, we avoid the hard, we end up doing the easy, and in doing the easy, we don't create meaningful things. And this guy understood this better than anybody. This is Steve Jobs. This is a quote. When you start looking at the problem and it seems really simple, you don't really understand the complexity of the problem, and your solutions are way too oversimplified. Then you get into the problem and you see it's really complicated and you come up with all these convoluted solutions. That's where most people stop. The really great person, and I would just modify this to say the really great innovator will keep going until they find the key underlying principle of the problem and come up with a beautiful, elegant solution that works. That sounds painfully, simply, obviously, trite, true, whatever, of course. What are you kidding? Why is that even a quotable quote? But it's true. All the failure I've seen in 3 years at Harvard is a function of this. Solutions are way too oversimplified, don't really understand the problem, create convoluted solutions. You're not working off the truth, you're working off your own delusions. And so you're spinning stuff out and hoping somehow that magically is going to turn into an innovation that is successful. But people don't like to do the hard stuff, so they do shit like that. This is just a this is the model we use at Harvard on how to think about innovation, and I won't go into details, but basically in the center is truth and trust. We're going to talk about that more in a second. It's an infinite loop. This task of innovation is not sequential, it's not linear, it's ongoing, it's forever. I think Facebook is trying to innovate as much today as it did 10 years ago. And then the other thing that we talk about a lot is it's all about the people, and we'll come back to that too in a second. So that's the outside-in view of innovation, like how to think about that from a product or service development standpoint. And then there's another view, which I don't know if it's going to be that, hopefully interesting. I don't know if it'll be that applicable, but hopefully it'll be interesting. So when we're talking about RIM, I think we all agree, like, if you don't innovate as an organization, you're going to be out of business. I don't care what you are. You will end up being out of business. Just like empires end up being out of business, you will end up being out of business. I'm not sure, by the way, if I offend anybody, I apologize, but I do work in higher ed. I'm not sure a lot of people in higher ed actually embrace what I just said, that actually applies to higher ed, but I believe it does. I just think it's a longer time horizon. So the question is, how do you innovate? And a lot of organizations approach it one of three ways, which my view is they're Band-Aids, they're slap-ons, and they're fundamentally ineffective. So the way we're going to solve we're going to need to be more innovative as an organization, we're going to hire it. Sarah, you're now our Chief Innovation Officer, and your job magically is to imbue innovative sensibilities throughout the land to cause us to produce more amazing shit.
Awesome.
Works really well. Doesn't work at all. Then there's we're going to buy innovation. There's this really cool startup that's sort of in our space, but kind of tangential, and we're going to buy them, and just by buying them, we're going to somehow magically integrate them into our culture, and then it will make us them. Doesn't work out so well. And then the third one, we're going to create an innovation lab. That's the ticket. We're going to rent 15,000 square foot of space. We're going to have some whack job like Chris, and he's going to hire a bunch of other whack jobs, and they're going to like invent wacky shit, and then at some point the wacky shit will somehow, I don't know, we'll bring it into the mother, and then the mother will squash the wacky shit, and then we'll start over again. That works really well. Slap-on Band-Aids never, ever, ever work. Ever. I'm sorry. I have a bunch of friends that used to work for me that now work at Fidelity Labs. Not so good. Okay, so how do you do this? The only way to create an innovative organization is to actually create an innovative culture. So how do you do that? Well, before we do that, I want to go back in time a little bit. I love this. I love this story. So there's this guy named Sir John Glubb, G-L-U-B-B. You should all Google it when you get out of here, or if you're bored with me, Google it now. In the 1920s, he basically for like 30 years studied empires. That's all he did. That was his like thing. And he came up with, he wrote a book, obviously, not a good looking man. But But he basically came up with this sequence of events of empires. And I'm going to argue it applies to organizations, it applies to people, it applies to countries, it applies to everything. And the sequence goes something like this. Stage 1, the age of the pioneer. We're going to go to the new land. We're innovators. We're all in this together. Come on, people. Right? Stage 2, we're going to take over. We're going to conquer. Maybe the indigenous people, maybe the countries next door, I don't know, but we're on a roll, man. Let's keep going, and we're all in this together. Stage 3, let's settle down. We've established, and we have enough land, and we have some good things going, and we've moved from, a nomadic society to a agrarian one, and let's just start doing some bartering, buying and selling, and things are stabilizing. Like, things are really pretty good. Like, this is really done. We're done well. We now have an upper middle class. We now have, like, nice cars. Like, we are amazing. We are just amazing. Have you seen my car? I have 2 cars. No, I have 3 cars. Our stuffy doesn't stink at all. We're amazing. The Roman Empire. Nero, fiddling as it burns. The excess, the indulgence, the beginning of the end. Familiar? The question is, where's the United States then? Let's not go there, because that would be depressing and we all start crying. Right? I added one, so he had 6. I added this one. So a lot of entities don't go out of business. Like RIM didn't go out of business. RIM's still alive, right? Empires, Britain, the British Empire didn't go out of business, but they're still alive. But they got cotton mouth, they're a little fuzzy, their eyes are a little bloodshot. They haven't slept in decades. They got this Brexit thing, it's all fucked up, right? Anyway, the point is, your organization is on this path. It is. It's somewhere on this path. I don't know where it is, but it's on this path. And so the question is, how do you avoid, I don't know, from here on? How do you avoid that? And I have, as he had 7 stages, well, he had 6 plus mine, I have 7 lessons on how to build an innovative culture. This book does not exist. I fabricated the cover, but if you want to buy it, see me later. It's called a dry test. Number 1. So I live actually right next to that building. So I look at this building every day. And this guy that I was talking to, who works for State Street, was bemoaning, this is like a year ago. He's like, yeah, the CEO, I forget what the guy's name is. He's like insistent we become more innovative. Like insistent that the only way State Street is going to survive is if we become more innovative. And I looked at the guy and I said, is he innovative? And he's like, no, he's an actuarial. Organizations are exactly like families. My kids follow what I do, the good and the bad. They're not carbon copies, but they model our behavior. If you want your organization, whether it's the institution or a department within the institution, to be more innovative, you have got to decide that you are going to be more innovative. This is my point about creativity. You first have to decide that this is important to you and that you are willing to change your behavior, in part because you're so desperate to change the outcome of your part of the organization. If you don't decide this, screw it. If you're going to like delude yourself into thinking that other people somehow magically will do better at their job and change the way they're doing what they do, but you don't have to, come on. So you got to look like a leader in the eyes. Could be the CEO, or actually could be you in the mirror. It's the first rule. The other rule is rewriting the unwritten rules. Anybody ever heard of the unwritten rules? Sarah, you've read everything. Very impressive. You should give her a raise. Is that true? No. So years ago, Arthur D. Little, which is an old management consultant, I think one of the first management consultant there, came up with this construct called the unwritten rules. He wrote a book about it. It's really interesting. And the gist of the book is what powers organizations is not the vision, it's not the mission, it's not the declared values, it's not the business plan, it's not any of the sort of defined, documented stuff on the wall. What powers organization, what informs what they do or don't do more than anything are the unwritten rules. The sensibilities, the behaviors, the whatevers that get transferred from employee to employee, generation to generation. Unwritten, unspoken, but understood. The example I use is a school that I worked with 3 years ago. Head of school hired me to help him turn the organization into a high-performing business. First thing I realized, there are 3 cultures going on here. Head of school culture, COO culture, head of faculty culture. 3 different cultures. So I said, let's have an offsite with the management team and like talk about some stuff. So we get everybody in a room, there's like 7 people, we're sitting around a table like this, and I go, okay, let's talk about the unwritten rules. And they're like, what are that? And I explain what it is, and they're like, okay, I want everybody to write down the top 3 unwritten rules. Don't share, write down on a piece of paper what you think the unwritten rules of this organization are. They all write them down, they hand it in to me. I go over to the flip chart, I start categorizing, right, the unwritten rules. The number 1 unwritten rule of the organization that they all pretty much agreed on was distrust before trust. Imagine trying to create a high-performing organization. Imagine trying to create an innovative organization on a foundation of, I don't trust you one bit. No way, no how. Oops, sorry. Which points to rule number 3. I actually disagree, with the brainstorming thing. The guy's point of view on brainstorming was like, well, brainstorming doesn't work because people aren't comfortable actually telling the truth with each other. That's basically what he said. That's true. That doesn't mean brainstorming is bad. That means the management of the culture of the organization is bad. That means you've allowed distrust to rule the culture. Like if I'm afraid of Jeff, we have a dysfunctional relationship. We have a dysfunctional company, a dysfunctional institution. In fact, that little visual on the side, on the right, how many read the New York Times article 2 years ago about Project Aristotle, which Google initiated to try to understand high-performing teams? Sarah, once again, seriously, double, at least double, or time and a half, I don't know. So the gist of that article, and it's worth reading, I talk about it almost weekly, much to my wife's annoyance. The number 1 attribute of high-performing organizations, the number 1 attribute of innovative teams, the number 1 attribute of any entity that has the capacity to create unique material value is psychological safety. I am not afraid of you. I can say whatever I want to you. You can say whatever you want to me. We can work through whatever shit we have, and we can make something better together. Whether you're my boss, you're my peer, you work for me, it doesn't matter. Our functional roles are irrelevant. We're sitting at this table as human beings, and we fundamentally trust each other and the environment we work in. At Harvard, I've spent the last 3 years creating a culture within our little innovation lab of psychological safety. And the number 1 way I do that is I tell everybody the truth about everything. I told Brad about my son Emmett, who's struggling with bulimia and depression. All 22 members of my staff know that. They know he's in a program in Scurry, Texas. They know how hard it is for me. I have cried in front of them. Other people have cried at meetings. It's okay because we're trying to get to an environment where people trust people. If you can get there, your innovative capacity, I would argue, just went up 3,000%.
What was the name of the article?
Just Google Project Aristotle, Google New York Times, and it'll pop right up. Point 4. This is back to people's unwillingness to change their behaviors, to step forward, to step up. They need some motivating context. Desperation is really effective. So if I went back to Harvard and I said, hey guys, if we don't actually implement the strategic plan that we talked about this morning at 10 o'clock and get it done by the end of November, they're going to shut us down. Do you think the productivity would go up? You know, problem with that is not particularly motivating, but it is motivating in the short term. It doesn't sustain itself. The other side of it is when I got to Harvard, and I've done this at every company I've run, I created some language around the journey. Remember the journey to Santa Clara?
Yeah.
Brad and I used to work together. At Harvard, I created something called the journey to I. So when I got to the I lab, I realized, oh my God, this isn't actually innovative. The people here aren't innovative. What we're doing isn't innovative. It's actually a co-working space for Harvard students. Shoot me. No, literally, 30 days in, I'm like, what have I done? But I'm like, okay, we're going to turn this whole thing around. We're going to completely change the nature of this place. We're going to go from being reactive to proactive, from transactional to innovative. And we're going to call this thing the journey to I. And I stands for innovation. I stands for intentionality. I stands for interconnectedness. I stands for the individual. And I stands for the impact that we are going to have, not just on the customers we serve, but on the employees that are helping us do it. And the journey to I is the superset theme, if you will, of our strategic plan. We talk about on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. We are on a journey. And that language has served as a fairly effective motivating force for the organization. You know what I'm talking about, right? Anybody have one? Anybody have a sacred cow? Come on. Talk about truth and trust. We're in the cone of silence. Nobody will talk. You know what I'm talking about. Sacred cows. The elephant is the thing you won't say to the CEO that you really should say, but you're afraid to say it because he or she might fire your ass. And then the ugly babies are, I've been working on this project for like 3 years, and I know it doesn't really work, but I just love it, and I can't put it to sleep. I just love it. Love it. And let's just keep funding it, even though we know it doesn't have a chance in hell of succeeding. So here's my this is like a slightly twisted sacred cow version, but so I do one big consulting gig a year because Harvard pay sucks. And there's this big technology company. I'm like the CEO whisperer, and I'm involved with their strategic planning process. And we did this whole strategic plan session a couple of months ago, and we do the standard SWOT analysis. You guys know what SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threat. So we do the strengths on a flip chart. We do the weaknesses, flip chart. We do the opportunities, flip chart. And then we do the threats one. I'm like, okay, what are the threats? And they're like, competition, and the technology, and I go, there's one other threat. And there's like 8 of them sitting around this big mahogany conference table. And they're like, what's that? The threat is you. You're actually the biggest threat. You've been running this business for 20 years. It's a $1 billion business. It's successful. It's public. The biggest threat is you. And your inability to believe you don't have to evolve. Your inability to innovate yourself. Your inability to change this whole thing up. That's the biggest threat. So it's possible that we are the sacred cows. We are the lumbering elephants. And we are the ugly babies. It's possible. Almost done. So this little stretchy thing is called a stretch reward. So we created this a couple years at Harvard to recognize failure. Not to recognize success. To recognize employees who have stepped up, stepped out, taken some risks, tried some shit, and it failed. And we give them this, in recognition of that, we give them a gift certificate, gift card, several $1,000 gift card. No, $200, kidding. But it should be several $1,000s. But the point is, we are very overt about celebrating failure. We're very overt about celebrating. But that's antithetical to how we're, no. We only pay people for winners. We don't pay people for losers. Well, if you only reward people for winners, then there's a disincentive in that to try stuff, because if there's risk involved, it might not be a winner, in which case you're going to be ridiculed by the rest of the organization, so I'm not going there. Point 7. And this is the big one, and I'm almost done. An organization is nothing but a collection of individuals. Whatever school you work at doesn't exist. What exists are the individuals that work at that school. If you want that entity to be more innovative, it is necessary and logical that that means the individuals within it must be more innovative. There's nothing else. You can't slap it on. You can't buy it. It's not a pill. You can't take it. The only way to do this is to actually innovate yourself. Which begins, my earlier point, is you've got to first declare, I am an innovator. I am a creator. I can create change in my life, in my business, in my world for the betterment of me and everybody else. So we created, and this is my message to the folks at Harvard, we created these 5 human performance principles, guiding lights, guardrails on how to encourage the people on our staff to be more innovative. And the first one is start with why. Understand the problem before you start working on anything. The second one is raise your own bar. Become a learning machine. Sarah is a learning machine. No, I'm not kidding. I don't even know her. I met her like an hour ago. But this is your point you made about breadth. You cannot be a creative person or an innovative person without a breadth of perspective, a breadth of content. Limited content in, limited content out. It's fundamental. So you got to raise your own learning bar. You got to get outside. One of the issues I see in higher ed is it's such a siloed place. Like even the Harvard Innovation Labs, we have to break this natural sensibility of, like, we go to work every day. We open the door. We go in. We close the door. We talk to each other, and then we leave. Well, there's a big world out there that we need to be bringing into us, and or we need to be going out to that world. Think sideways is none of this is discrete. If there's one thing I've learned about innovation, you have to do it together. Jeff in a room alone trying to solve a problem is not going to be as effective as Jeff and I in a room trying to solve a problem. You've got to think laterally, think sideways. And the last one, and this is probably the hardest one for anybody, take risk and eschew legacy thinking and convention. Don't look back. That presumes that the organization you're working in values risk and isn't simply holding on to legacy because it perceives that to be the least risky way to go, where I actually think it's the most risky way to go. So the conclusion is, what are you going to do? Not what your organization is going to do. What are you going to do as an innovator? How are you going to change the choices you make, the work you do, the way you approach it, that's going to have a better, greater impact on what you do, on your life, your own movie, on the organization that you work for, or whatever? It's a choice. Like, it really is a choice. And this is what I said to the students last night. This is not like waiting for somebody to tell you. This is actually a choice that I think each and every one of us has the ability to make. So with that, I hope it was helpful, maybe even comical, I don't know. Thank you very much.